Welcome to a new season of the Greenpill Podcast. We are exploring how we can use technology, community, and new forms of coordination to build, fund, and accelerate what matters in the 21st century. This season, I'm talking with builders, thinkers, and innovators who are pushing the edges of what's possible, from on-chain capital allocation to Ethereum to AI alignment to reimagining markets and governance. Together, we'll uncover how these ideas move us closer to a world that's improving every week, month, or quarter, what we call protopia, our preferable realistic future that is constantly improving through small incremental changes over time. If you want to learn more, visit our website at greenpill.network, where you can download the Greenpill book for free, play with some of our ecosystem projects, join the Telegram, or participate in the network. Today, I have Jake Hartnell on the podcast. He is the reality engineer and the mind behind ENOVA, which is an emergent egregore project. We'll explain what that means during the episode. But you can kind of think of Jake as a tinkerer experimenting with the intersection of memetics, crypto economics, and collective action. And today we are talking about hyperstitions, which is basically, you can think of it as a belief that manifests itself through propagating through networks. So this is a new primitive that people in my circles are really excited about. And basically, how can we build crypto economic primitives that build collective action in the 21st century? How do we build hyperstitions? And in some ways, it's actually kind of funny, since Jake and I have been jamming, I've conceived that the original Greenpill book, Greenpilled, How Crypto Could Regenerate the World, is sort of a hyperstition, because we're not just trying to measure what's happening in that space and why a priori we could regenerate the world with crypto. We're actually trying to manifest that outcome. So if I were to hyperstition crypto regenerating the world, then I think that that's an example of using the technology and the thinking that Jake brings to the forefront. So I really enjoyed this episode with Jake. I think that he's really smart, and I think hyperstitions are potentially really powerful primitive that people are going to use in the future. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Hey, Jake, what's up?
Yo, I'm really excited to be on Greenpill.
Yeah, excited to have you. I think that you and I have known each other for a couple of years, and this is our first time doing a podcast together. So let's get into it. So you and I have our fingers in a couple of the same pies, but the one I'm interested in talking about today is hyperstitions. Maybe you could tee us off by just telling us what that word means, and that'll lead us into the episode.
Yeah, the TLDR definition of a hyperstition is like a fiction that makes itself real. A way I like to put it, though, because there's slightly different like interpretations of it, but I think think of it as like a vision of the future that impacts the present. We can think of it as like a story that you put out into the world, and this story is so powerful that people actually reorient their lives around this story. And it's kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will.
Yeah, the way I've been explaining it is that it's like a superstition, except instead of being supernatural, it's really networked. And so a hyperstition, the word hyper means very networked to me. And then stition is the belief structure. And so as the belief gets more shared in a networked based atmosphere, it can become more likely to be true. There's this reflexive relationship between the superstition, the belief being shared, and it being propagated through the network and its ability to come true. And not all things that you can project as a belief can be a hyperstition, but things that are able to follow that network structure and manifest through networks are hyperstitions. So yeah, that's sort of me saying back to you how I think of hyperstitions. But I guess like the most reductionist, easiest to follow definition for the rest of this episode is just a belief that becomes true through being shared. How's that for a reductionist definition? Like, what's the lowest common denominator definition that we could come up with for the rest of the episode?
I think a vision of the future that impacts the present. I've been liking that one a lot lately.
Okay, great. So, but can we just like rattle off a couple examples of hyperstitions? What hyperstitions have we seen in the world that you think are relatable, and also, which ones are you looking to manifest right now?
Totally. I think let's talk with like just examples. Like, I think perhaps the example that's on everyone's mind at the moment is like actually AGI. AGI is a great example of hyperstition. It was actually literally just fiction. In people like Jeffrey Hinton, who created neural networks, like read this science fiction, right? And these stories of like intelligence that was like, computer intelligence, but like had the same or greater like capabilities than like human intelligence. And this inspired a lot of like the early engineers working in like machine learning and, you know, computer science to like do the work. Like they chose in some ways their career path to like actually like make this future kind of real. And it was still so far off. But even if you look at like, you know, Sam Altman and people like that, like how they talk about like AGI, right? It is this like kind of, you know, fictional story, right? And at the same time, like more and more people are believing in this fictional story to the tune of like putting like billions and like trillions of dollars into investing and making it happen, right?
Right.
I think another even alternative example would be like Ethereum, right? And you know, when Ethereum started, it was actually just like, you know, there was like the idea of smart contracts, and everyone just had this collective imagining of like all the different things that could be possible if we had like the right coordination tools. And none of it was actually real at the time, right? Like 2015, 2016,
Yeah.
2014, if you were like in those circles, like this was all just like hypothetical, like could be
Yeah.
possible kind of thing. And you know what? Like we haven't achieved all of it, but a lot of the stuff that was talked about actually became reality. And you look at things like DeFi and all that stuff, it exists today and it's real.
Yeah. That takes me back almost to like Bitcoin as one of the original networked hyperstitions. I think that like hyperstitions are more possible in a networked age, you know, which, you know, we can talk about networks as a substrate a little bit, but you know, the fact that Satoshi shared this white paper and then it sort of caught fire and gained legitimacy the more it was shared. And it's literally a $1 trillion asset these days. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, AGI are examples, but I really want to try to ground us in something relatable. So like if I go to my coworkers in my office and I say, I'm hungry, let's get lunch, and then they all share with each other, oh, I'm actually hungry too, let's get lunch. Is that a hyperstition? I'm just looking for like a really relatable small one that's not like, you know, AGI is like, you know, humanity altering, but it's too big to be relatable. What's the minimum like smallest hyperstition that you could practice this in your everyday life?
So I actually think a really like simple one that's not like, hey, let's go hyperstition lunch. But maybe like hyperstition a party, right?
Mhm. That's a good one. Yeah.
You know, like a lunch, you can get lunch with a few people, you can get lunch by yourself, but like a party is something that you need a lot of people, especially a good party, is something you need a lot of people to like converge on, right? You need them to make time to show up in their calendar. You need some people to like hyperstition a sound system and some really cool party lights and all the like a location, all this. There's a bunch of stuff that has to like come together for the party to happen. So I think that maybe that's a good real life example. It's a little bit higher barrier than like just lunch, right? Like, so yeah, I think I like to hyperstition parties all the time. So um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like maybe one critical attribute here is that it gets better the more it's shared. So basically, a party gets better the more people are like really actively engaged. I mean, up to a certain point, and the more people that join. Whereas lunch is like, well, I can get lunch alone or with 10 people, and it's not that different. I mean, maybe there's a marginal difference between the social atmosphere, but like a party, when everyone's really engaged, gets really good. And the same with Bitcoin, the same with Ethereum. There's a network effect there.
you know, you also want hyperstitions to be like somewhat aspirational. Like,
Mm.
if they're just like a hyperstition is a story that you put out in the world, and that story has to be really powerful, right? It's like sometimes I think we're using this word a little bit too lightly, like, and we need to think actually about like serious, like very visionary kind of things, right? You know, maybe another example is like Green Pill itself as like a movement, right? Like, you know, there's like a certain set of values and a vibe and a vision of the future that y'all are trying to like hyperstition in the world. So that could be another example.
Yeah, the subtitle of the book was How Crypto Could Regenerate the World. So it was green pilled, How Crypto Could Regenerate the World. And I hedged there big time uh, because I don't think that it is right now, but there's a sort of latent potential energy that exists in the technology. And yeah, maybe the more we sort of like talk about this vision of crypto as a means to regeneration, the more it gets shared, the more builders build it, the more it's actually collectively manifested. You know, and I would never take any amount of credit for the work that other people are doing. I think that, you know, Refi DAO is a channel, Regen Network is a channel, Greenpill is a channel, Gitcoin's a channel for this hyperstition. But yeah, it feels like an inevitability that if we keep on sort of pumping talent and capital into that vision, that eventually it becomes more real. And yeah, maybe that relates it back to the podcast to have greenpilling itself be a means for hyperstitioning. Okay, so I'd love to pivot into actually what you're building. So tell us about the tool that you've been building to bring hyperstitions into the world. Are you hyperstitioning hyperstitions?
We are hyperstitions. So we made this kind of we're building a bunch of things. Some of which were hyperstitioning. But so we started with hyperstition markets. And you can think of hyperstition markets as basically like prediction markets with like a biased outcome topology. In essence, we're like changing the incentive structure such that like the goal is not necessarily to predict stuff, but it's like to manifest stuff. So like as an example, the first market we did was like, will the 0x ENOVA account with a 0 gets to 3,333 Twitter followers? And if that happens, everyone's getting future ENOVA tokens, future points, right? And so, yeah, a hyperstition market is literally just a prediction market. We're biasing the incentives towards the outcomes we want.
So you've released a tool that helps hyperstitions become more real, and it sounds like the first hyperstition market that you've released is about having more Twitter followers for your actual main account. So you're using the market to sort of like build an initial social following. And then as this engine grows, you can point it at more interesting stuff. And right now I'm thinking about like the GG24 hyperstition campaign that we're doing right now. Yeah, maybe that's what the example that we should talk about next.
So yeah, we did the first hyperstition market. A lot of this stuff is also kind of like test run of these technologies. Like we don't want people like hyperstitioning like assassinations or things like that. So it's kind of like a very curated group of people. We're kind of just working with like people like Gitcoin grant rounds. But the next market we did, we should probably talk about how the first market ended.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Yeah, let's do it.
It was actually pretty much like it was a pretty big success. Like over about 100,000 people read the article on hyperstition markets. We had like a bunch of organic, real, influential followers, but we weren't. It ended with like bots basically taking over. It's like it's Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. We didn't like differentiate in like the Oracle, the market resolver, what constitutes a valid Twitter follower. It's just like number of Twitter followers. And so like people did the rational thing and they just realized they could make money by botting the account. And yeah, so we got a bunch of bot followers. That was really great.
Yeah. It's weird. It's sort of interesting how when you define a narrowly optimized metric like Twitter followers, then there's something powerful about that because it reduces all of the action down to that thing, but it can also hollow out the actual intent. I mean, this is basically what Goodhart's law is. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. But it feels like the hyperstitions, they sort of run on this rail of things that are easily reducible into a metric that you can push forward, and maybe the key is to hyperstition something more important than just like a Twitter follower. Yeah, where would you take that thought?
Yeah, I think that like for me, like the big takeaway is like you have to choose things where the manipulation is the manifestation. Um, so our second market, we wanted to like try to do some good in the world because like hyperstition can be like pretty scary and powerful technology. And so we decided to help increase donations for the bioregionalism Gitcoin grants round. So which is still ongoing. The goal was to get to $25,000 in donations by a certain date, which was a couple of days ago. And the great thing about this market is you can't really, I guess you could game it. But by gaming it, you're actually helping manifest the market, right? Like you can donate, it's like, it's much better than like Twitter followers, right? Where it's like the bots, like it's not exactly what we wanted, but we want donations. So we don't really care what people do to get donations to those addresses.
So the second market that you've launched is a hyperstition of more money going into a bioregional round. And, I just want to also name drop here Sylvie Protocol, which is a peer-to-peer proof of tree planting and tree still being their protocol. There's probably a more elegant way to say that. But basically, we've got Sylvie Protocol, which is a method of turning money into trees being planted in a distributed peer-to-peer verifiable way, and then we can hyperstition more reforestation through the primitives of Sylvie protocol, and then the hyperstition market. And so there's sort of like a couple different money Legos that are at play here, but hyperstitioning more bioregional reforestation has been the second campaign. I just said, how did I say that back to you? Anything you would challenge there, or anything you want to yes and?
No, I think that sounds great.
So hyperstitioning feels like this super powerful combination of a prediction market with a biased outcome, and then you combine it with other things.
Yeah, the other thing's actually really important, because like the key is like you also have to reward people that take actions toward narrative enactment. In essence, like we really don't want people to just sit around like at passively observing. We don't want them to be passively predicting. We really want them to be like actively trying to manifest stuff. There's a psychological change that we want to like flip in people's minds, right?
Mm-hmm. So you have agency.
Yeah. Um, so we reward people that take actions. So for example, donating. Donating is like the key action we want to incentivize. So we can just incentivize that directly, right? We have a attestation system, so we can like we have a small group that can recognize people for like sharing things on social media or doing actions like that. But that's actually a big component of hyperstition markets is like you don't just reward the positive outcome, but you try to also reward activities that are contributing towards that positive outcome. It's also the challenge is like thinking about those kinds of incentive systems, but I like a good challenge.
It feels like also understanding a valid theory of change for that market is kind of important, because then you can allow the network to work on high leverage things in actually creating that change. So every hyperstition market probably has a different theory of change. Theory of change is just like a systems change, people basically mapping out how we're going to bring into the world what we want to see. So like, Greenpill, how do we regenerate the world? Well, we don't know exactly, but our theory is that more capital and more builders activated around this is an important leverage point in that theory of change. And, actually, maybe a more simple example of theory of change is the party example, because it's so relatable. If I want to hyperstition a party, then we're going to need a place to do it. We're going to need a curated attendee list. We're going to need a purpose for the party. We're going to need to activate organizers that are going to make it happen. We're going to have to set a time frame for it. We're going to have to set a social container for it. Like that's like a very tangible, I think, example of a theory of change. But it feels like all of these hyperstition markets you're sort of exploring the theory of change as you try to bring the reality that you're hyperstitioning into being. And yeah, so I don't know. That feels like a best practice to me of when you're trying to hyperstition things. I'm curious if you have other best practices that you think of when it comes to building these markets or building these structures.
Yeah, I think that like we've done 2 markets now, which is not a lot. But I think we're getting to the point where we want to like start opening these up more for like more communities and people to like try them out. I think that while hyperstition markets are interesting, we shouldn't let them like we really shouldn't let them distract from like hyperstition itself, which I think is actually much more powerful. Um, it's like in many ways, like hyperstition market is like kind of a gimmick, and we can maybe call it by like a different name, right? Like they're like incentive markets or like coordination markets. I think that like hyperstition itself, like the stories we tell and like creating those like really appealing like narratives, and then that people can fit themselves into and orient their lives around, like that's I think the much more like powerful technology here. We are gonna like launch this website called hyperstition.life, and we're gonna let a lot more communities leverage hyperstition markets as a mechanism. Eve Boulder or Greenpill or other sort of aligned communities.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a super powerful skill to learn in the networked world. So the 21st century is just starting to think about creating a vision and pulling reality towards that vision and leveraging the power of networks. And I guess which is just another way of saying like rallying a community to help that vision come into existence. Or in the failure case, the feedback you get from the community might be really valuable in adjusting that North Star. And there's an
Yes,
evolution over time. But yeah, I'm
I do.
interested in sort of applying this in my work. At least like let's hyperstition more green pilling and hyperstition ETH Boulder into existence.
Great. See, this is the kind of stuff that I get really excited about. It's like we can obviously use this for like hyperstitioning like meme coins and things like that. But like, I think to me that we want to like do more interesting things than financial nihilism. Yeah, I think there is a lot of exciting potential. I think these are really good patterns and tools for bootstrapping, new projects and new communities, right? Where it's like help us get to our goal, and everyone who helps us get to the goal in measurable ways, like gets like progressive like ownership in like a community. So, and ENOVA, by the way, is not really just a hyperstition market platform. Like we are going to be spinning that out into like a separate website and stuff like that. But it's really well, people will see. It's emerging.
Well, yeah, I'm now that we've name dropped Innova, where can people find this? So say I want to play with the first two hyperstition markets that you've told me about. There's a link in the show note to it, but if you want to just sort of shout out the X link or the website link so that people can find it, I think that would be helpful.
Cool. So on X, ENOVA is 0x ENOVA, which is spelled EN0VA. So 0x EN0VA. And then the website is en0va.xyz.
What does that stand for, Innova?
So like it's kind of just like a made up word. And like, what's coming out next is we're gonna be birthing like a symbiont or like a cybernetic organism, if you will. Maybe we can have like a whole other like Greenpill podcast to talk about symbionts because it's a very deep topic. It's also a hyperstition. But yeah, like ANOVA, like en is like a prefix that means within, and then nova is like a explosion, right? Like a supernova, like something that creates all the material for life. And then the zero is just there to like hint at its like sort of cybernetic kind of nature.
Okay. So cybernetic is, as far as I recall, just means like augmented by technology. I think that's a reductionist definition. And then symbiont, I think, is a combination of one form and another. Am I saying that correctly? We don't, not without going into the whole deep rabbit hole here.
Yeah. So like a symbiont is basically like a distinct entity that emerges from the symbiosis between organic beings and synthetic systems.
Okay, got it. So these are emerging from a cybernetic ecology. And the other word that I want to drop here, just while we're sort of exploring this vocabulary, is the role of egregores. I wonder if you can tell us what an egregore is and how it relates to hyperstitions.
Great. We have so many fun things to talk about. So like an egregore is like, it's kind of this like sort of like occult or like memetic term, but I think it's like a non-physical entity or a thought form that arises from collective thoughts and emotions of a distinct group of individuals. Or you could think of it as like some collective like kind of mindset as like a really short form definition. That like egregores, like hyperstitions, all this reality engineering, like all these things are like important things to like understand as we like try to push forward for like a specific vision of how the world can be.
So basically, an egregore, it used to be sort of an occult term, which meant the collective intelligence of a group of people. But now that we actually have technology and we have things like Twitter or we have DAOs, you can actually sort of like see and measure the egregore in the digital realm.
Given new tools like attestation based governance tooling, and like we might have ways of actually like DAOs becoming more and more egregore like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that like the egregore gives it sort of like things that happen on Twitter or in social media feel like they're real, at least real in the digital sense, but they don't have staying power. And maybe it's DAOs and cybernetic technology like Hyperstition markets or other things that are sort of on chain that give it a little bit more permanence and stability, and that's what makes it powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there's a lot to explore. Egregores
Yeah.
is a deep rabbit hole.
Right. So, but it feels like you're sort of like really deep in this lore of cybernetic economies, and hyperstitions are sort of a vehicle for realizing more a more green pilled world, and but also giving people a vehicle for realizing their visions also. So if we were to zoom back out, having just gone down this rabbit hole of different vocabulary, take us to hyperstitions and what's next with hyperstitions and how people can use ENOVA and hyperstitions in their work.
Yeah. Well, if people want to like launch hyperstition markets, all they have to do is like reach out to us, and we'll help them. We're working on making Innova like and hyperstition markets more or less permissionless, which is like a big process because again, we don't want people like hyperstitioning like bad things. Like I think that like the main thing is like definitely just like check out Innova because we have some things that are coming up. We're going to be like birthing a collective hive mind, and also going to add another project I work on called Trustcraft to Innova to kind of like steward this collective intelligence as we're creating it, because we might not do a great job the first time. It's very experimental, so it's good to have some training wheels. And yeah, I think that we are hoping to like have a permissionless versions of Hyperstition markets live like early next year. But in the meantime, if people are interested in launching them, like we're more than happy to work with like existing communities that want to use them.
I'm wondering what the ideal market for something like this is. I mean, are we going to go to L1s and L2s and allow them to hyperstition that their software gets more adopted? We're going to do more Gitcoin goodness through it. What do you think the ideal launch point for this is?
I think that the ideal launch point is actually in the institution or the community around these things, right? Because like I think one of the things like just being real is like the first market got a lot of attention because it was just very novel and people were like, "Oh, hyperstition markets, that's a really cool word. Like this is like seems to be like some it captures some zeitgeist or whatever, right?" Um and I think to like actually like make hyperstition markets like the donation and stuff work, we actually need like a core community of influential people with like a voice to like help amplify these kind of stories and narratives, right? And perhaps like, tapping into like L1s and things like that. I mean, we could launch a hyperstition market around like Ethereum flipping Bitcoin.
That would get a lot of play, I think, on X, but it's not something that I have a good theory of change for how it happens. So it feels hard. While it feels like it would get a lot of play on social media. I don't know how we would turn that sort of like attention and capital into it actually happening, because the things that's blocked on, in my opinion, are just more adoption, and that's very hard to realize. But I don't know. Maybe this is a limiting belief. I don't know.
I think we should keep doing more green pill stuff, to be honest. Like, those are
Yeah.
the high positions I want to see in the world. And I think that they could use some more like muscle behind them, right? Like,
Mhm.
or just some like more incentives or more coordination around people like advocating for these kinds of narratives. Like, otherwise, like, crypto tends too much towards financial nihilism.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious if we were to hyperstition more green pilling, what that would look like. So the goal is to use crypto for pro-social ends and for planetary regeneration. I mean, not just planetary regeneration, but spiritual regeneration, intellectual regeneration, social capital, material capital. I think like you could see a regeneration for each of those things. And maybe like a very small part of that is more green pilling in the world. And green pill, is just taking a green tic tac and like sharing it with friends. But that's a ritual that symbolizes that you're sort of accepting this vision that crypto could be regenerative and pro social. and memetically propagating it through the green pill. But yeah, I mean, if we were going to launch a hyperstition market for more green pilling in the world or more regeneration, then what would that look like? I mean, can we kind of play jazz on top of that a little bit here?
I think that the donation markets are actually pretty great. I wish we had gotten like more engagement on the last one. I think, you know, but like I think the donation markets are great, especially if the entity that's receiving the donations is a nonprofit, because then you get into this very interesting like kind of meta where if the donation is tax deductible, you can potentially like profit from your donation. The way it works is like, okay,
Mhm.
you have a Hyperstition market, there's extra incentives for the outcome happening, right? For example, we have this, reforestation rounds, 25K. Um, if like it's tax deductible, someone donates 25K, they can deduct 25K on their taxes, right? And then they can buy a yes position in the prediction market, right? Because they single-handedly have enough to just swing the market. They can get all the money from the prediction market, and then they get the additional incentives on top for like donating and for like the outcome actually manifesting as well. So it's like, here's a way to like actually like profit from donation in a weird way.
Yeah, that's interesting. It feels like these hyperstitions have these different phases, and if I were to relate it back to green pilling, it's just like the one fucking crazy person that hyperstitions it is maybe iconoclastic, but they're making a contrarian bet in the world. And then it gets shared with like the first followers, and there's that like moment where you have people who are starting to believe the networked belief. And then there's sort of like a messy middle in between stage where you're trying to figure it out depending on how big the hyperstition is and how successful it's going to be. This could last forever or it could be pretty short. But then there's like a sort of like home stretch phase where it's very clear that it's going to become true, and there's an incentive to pile on and just like benefit from bringing it into that home stretch. And yeah, it's just sort of interesting to me to think about the different ebbs and flows that a hyperstition can go through between like the one crazy person that says it in the beginning and the actual market that realizes it in the end. And the group dynamics there and the network dynamics, they feels like they deserve a little bit of study if we're going to make this into a practice and a best practice that people do in their everyday lives.
Definitely. Like we just did like two pretty small experiments at the end of the day. There's a lot more to like learn from these things. I actually like to think of
Yeah.
it as like this is like how Futarchy should be. Like, um,
Mm.
it's
You want to
like
just explain Futarchy real quick? I'm not sure everyone has heard of it.
okay, so like Futarchy is basically like leveraging like prediction markets for decision making. So like, what should we do next as a DAO? Let's have a prediction market based on like, what our token price will be if we do this thing versus not do this thing, right? And using that to make decisions.
I think it also decouples like the direction that we want to go from the actual provider that's going to do it. So the 2021 era DAO way of doing it is saying, "Hey, we want 1,000 developers, and we propose that if you spend $1 million on us, we're going to be able to do it." But Futarchy is more like, "Hey, we decided that getting 1,000 developers is our goal, and then there's like an open market for which of the proposals are going to do it, and you separate this sort of like goal from the provider."
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way of framing it. But what I think
Yeah.
is like really interesting about uh or something that I'm personally down to explore a lot more in terms of Futarchy, and I've been talking with some people about this, is like putting recursive like incentive feedback loops on top of it. Um, in essence, like Futarchy is only as good as your ability to like attract qualified participants that can make good bets and decisions inside the market. And so like I think being able to like put incentive, like outcome-based incentives or like incentive feedback loops on top of like Futarchy like mechanisms can make things like very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting thing, and I feel like green pill for me and regen, that was a hyperstition. I didn't have that language back then, but I'm excited to work together and to try to hyperstition this into the world and to kick the tires on hyperstition markets. So
The key thing Kevin that they need is like, so we've been theorizing about how to make a hyperstition engine, which is like a next level up. And the key is like, it's all about the community. Like the community is the Hyperstition engine. Like you need a strong network of people with shared and aligned values that can work together and coordinate to like make these narratives happen, right? Um, and I think that we can work on building that core thing. It's almost more that actually is more important than the silly mechanism of coordination markets or these like prediction markets with biased incentives and stuff. Like at the end of the day, this is like memetic, like psychotechnology. It's all about the stories. We need compelling visions of the world, and then we need networks of people that are aligned and can coordinate to go and make those things real. Like
The other thing I love about that is that in a world that's super nihilistic and sort of like where people are commodified in some way, community as the key ingredient means that this isn't a commodified thing. You're going to have to actually win hearts and minds to your causes in order to hyperstition into the world. And that feels like a decentralized immune system as much as anything else.
exactly.
Well, we're getting to the home stretch of the episode, so I'll move into final questions. In a world in which you're maximally successful, what does the world look like? So take us to 2035, and we've hyperstitions into the world. What does that maximally successful world look like?
We're gonna hyperstition collective intelligence and new collective consciousness tools into the world, and we're gonna make DAOs work. I don't
Ooh,
know.
I like that. Very contrarian take in the 2020s to say DAOs are going to work.
No, DAOs are gonna outcompete these boomer orgs. They're dinosaurs, and they don't have things like Futarchy and hyperstition markets, and like new collective intelligence technology. Like we're the first generation of DAOs is like, I think you said something, the Schelling point of like, we like we're judging DAOs based on like they've been around for like 5 years, right? And corporations have been around for like 300 years. And it's like, let us cook. I think we're like, ENOVA is like this like self-organizing organization. It's like a meta DAO, if you will. We use more fancy terms like symbionts and like collective intelligence and things like that to make it sound cool. Um, but like at the end of the day, it's a DAO. It's like we're trying to hyperstition a world where like um, you know, it's not just techno feudalism, but instead we have like
Mhm.
co-ownership and coexistence with these like other like intelligent entities that seem to be arising these days. Hyperstition already exists. We don't need to hyperstition it. It's like, like everyone's talking about hyperstition these days. Um, it's the it's the other things, and this is why I love your work and like the work of like Greenpill and all this other stuff. At least like at least you guys are trying to like tell alternative stories that aren't doom and gloom of how things could be.
Yeah. Well, what I really love about what you just said was, the collective intelligence vehicles is that, I think like if you conceive of the world in the most nihilistic terms, that we're all just pawns and knights and rooks on billionaires' chessboards. What I like about hyperstitions is that we could build an egregore or like a collective thought form that together is as powerful as a billionaire or like a government and enact collective action that is the will of the people by and for the will of the people. So that's a vehicle for hope for me.
I like that. That's a great hyperstition. That's a good one.
Yeah. Okay, last final question. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to say?
We didn't talk about reality engineering, but that's okay because maybe we want to keep that one to ourselves for a while.
You and I hang out in some of the same circles, so the new vocabulary on this episode for the audience is, I think, quite intense. But for me and you, there's quite a deep rabbit hole here.
We definitely need to do those in different episodes, especially the symbiote one. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have like too much to like add. Like I would say like people should definitely go and check out ENOVA. We are going to be launching some more crazy things soon. Um, if people want to launch hyperstition markets and are part of the Green Pill network and community, we will help you do it. Just message us, and we will help you launch your thing.
I love
And
that.
yeah, I don't know. People should still believe in DAOs because DAOs are awesome.
Contrarian AF. I love that. All right. Well, we're going to wrap the episode here. Check out Jake's profile in the links in the podcast show notes, and then check out the Hyperstition market from there. And then, Jake, I think we should schedule a deep dive on some of this stuff. Maybe we'll put together like a 2 or 3 hour episode at some point. But for now, we'll cut it there on Hyperstitions. And thanks for your work, and thanks for appearing on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. It's great.
Definitely. All right. Peace. Already, you just heard from Jake Hartnell. I'm really inspired by Hyperstitions. I think that Jake is at the forefront, at the frontier, and I view my role as bringing you information from the frontier so that you can use it in your everyday work in the space. If you enjoyed this episode, check out the links in the show notes to learn more about Jake, and you can check out Greenpill at greenpill.network. If you value what we're doing, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, share it with a friend. That really helps other people find the work that we're doing. Thank you. See you on the next one. Goodbye.